Today we are going to do a 3D printing activity that is going to either teach you or reinforce your knowledge of how we do 3D printing. So in Onshape, there is a file that has been shared with you in your class called 3D printing activity. So first go to your classroom and you will open this file up. Now whenever we are in Onshape and we want to 3D print a file, we have to first download the STL file. What the STL file does is it converts the CAD model into a lot of very tiny triangles that we can then use for different purposes. In our case, we will then input that STL file into a slicer software to prepare for 3D printing. So first, you're going to come down to your tab for your Part Studio, right-click, Export. When you export it, the file name, you should add your name into the file name. You can make the file name just your name, or you can leave Part Studio in there. If you've named the Part Studio something else, that's fine as well. The only thing that is required is that your name is included in the file name somewhere. Make sure that the format is an STL file. There are a lot of options you can choose from, but for our purposes, we need it to be STL. We always want to make sure the units are in millimeters and our resolution is fine. Once you have all of that selected properly, click Export. Whenever you export the file, it will go into your downloads. That's where we will access it when we want to pull it into our slicing software. We are first going to look at the Dremel 3D printer. So to access the Dremel 3D slicing software, come down here to the search and you're going to type in Dremel, and as you begin to type that in, you should see the Dremel Digilab 3D slicer pop up. Go ahead and open that. Once the slicing software opens up, the most important thing that you have to do first is select the appropriate 3D printer. So that way we know that we are preparing this for the ones that we actually have in the classroom. If you do not select the correct printer, there are some of the choices that will not work. Now, if it's your first time opening this, it will bring up a window asking you which one to choose. If you've used it before, you'll notice up here, it will say the 3D printer you used the last time. And you can always click on Add Printer if it is not already the Dremel 3D 45. So once you've made sure that you have the correct printer, we're now going to bring in our file. So we go to Open File, and we should look in our downloads. Right here, notice I have that STL file, and that brings it into the workspace of the 3D slicer software. Now there's a few things that we're going to look at here. First of all, if I right-click my right mouse button, I can hold that down and I can drag this around so I can take a look at what this looks like. I can look underneath, I can look on top. Now, I want you to notice that the way this is oriented right now, we've talked about in class how if you 3D print with the size of this, it's very likely that the filament will not stick and it's not the best orientation to do the 3D print in. So we're going to rotate this so it's lying flat. So over here we have this menu. If you click on the object, the first menu option is that you can move it. So you can drag these arrows and you can move it to the right, to the left, up and down. We don't really want to move up and down because we don't want it to be off of the build plate. We can also change the values in here and just select how far we want them moved. So for our purposes, we're going to drag it over here to the left side of the build plate. If you click on the next tool, that's scale. Now, right now the scale is 100%. It tells us the measurements of this part. If we wanted to change this, let's say we wanted to make it just half the size of what it really is, we could come over here in the scale and we could change it to 50%. And it's now going to change every one of the measurements half of the size that it normally is. So that was just a try out. We want to keep it at 100%. Underneath the scale is rotate, and this is what we really want to use here. Now, if you notice the rotation, we have 3 rotations. We have the rotation that's going left and right. We have the rotation that's kind of turning it left and right, and we have the rotation that is kind of flipping it on its back or its front. So if you turn around to the side, you can really see the red one. And if we grab this, we can do a 90-degree rotation. Okay, now, if you want to undo something because it's not what you wanted it to be, you can always press Control and Z, and it will return it to where you were. Now, notice there are 2 buttons here where we can have it lay flat, and we can reset it. So those buttons sometimes are helpful to automatically do something, sometimes they're not. It just depends. But for our purposes, we want to grab the red one, we want to drag it, hold down your left mouse button until you get to 90 degrees, and that will lie it flat on the build plate. Now, as I said before, we want to move it all the way over to the left because we're going to do one more thing today with this. We're going to add other copies of this same object. So to add more copies, you right-click on the object and choose Multiply Selected Model. This allows us to make copies. If we make 1 copy, that will give us 2 of the model. If we make 2 copies, it's going to keep the one we have and make 2 more copies, giving us 3 total. So that's what we want to do. So notice we have all 3 laid out here, and you can move them around a little bit if you want to. We just want to make sure that we have all 3 nicely on the build plate. And then you can click anywhere in the white space. Now notice if you move this and it goes off of the build plate, you see a different look to it. That's an indicator that it is not on the build plate, and if you move around you can see it's far off of the build plate. Sometimes you can move it on to the edges if you're going to make a lot of copies of something. And you have to just really watch that once that disappears and it's that blue color, now it's in the area that will be able to be 3D printed. Now, your objects may not be this blue color. So we're going to look at one of the reasons that might be. Up here to the right is your material. Now, we've talked about material in class, and currently the material that's going to be used is PLA, but we want to change that. So if you click on the PLA down arrow and you click on the arrow beside Dremel, we have several options. We have Eco ABS, we have a nylon, a PETG, and a PLA. For this particular print, we are going to choose PETG. That's a different type of filament. And notice when we choose that, it changes the color of our object. Now, the color of our object is not associated in any way with the color that is going to be 3D printed. It's simply the color that indicates the filament being used. We are going to leave our infill alone, and we are now ready to slice. Now, if you don't see this prepare button here, you should click on the maximize button on the screen, and that will allow you to see the prepare button. Press prepare. Give it a minute to do its job slicing. So now in the slicing, this is converting it to a type of file that the Dremel 3D printer can understand. Once we have it sliced, this new message, ready to save to file, is going to pop up. We click on Save to File. Now, this is the naming convention that I want you to use. This is always for Dremel going to start with a D3, and you can get rid of that. What I want you to do is have your name first, underscore the 3D printer, so you can put Dremel in there, underscore color that you want this 3D printed in. So I'm going to say I want mine red, and then you're going to save it. So your name underscore Dremel underscore the color you want it printed in. Then you click save. Where does this go? It goes to your downloads folder. So now you can go to Canvas to upload this. When you are looking for the file, if you go to downloads, I want you to notice that in downloads, this is the last file right here. It says Mrs. Dean underscore Dremel underscore red dot G code. If you are trying to 3D print to the Dremel 3D printer, it must have that extension .g code. It will not work if it doesn't say .g code. The next video will show you how to do the same process, except you will be using the Flash Forge printer.